Alright everybody, I'm pretty excited about this avocado guy down here. That's going to be me for the day. Today we're going to be studying the male and female reproductive systems, specifically the anatomy and physiology of them. That's one of 3 lessons for this unit. So typically in the classroom I had a little pretest that was called Is It a Boy or a Girl? And it's a game on Kahoot. And if you'd like to play, you can pause this video and go to this link, and you'll be playing by yourself, but I don't know, maybe you can post your score on the discussion board on Canvas. So it's bit.ly/2y capital T capital O P0 capital D. I might spell that out because the 0 and O might have been confusing. So we'll start with external female anatomy. So the vulva is just the general name for the entire area. And I don't know if you can see the mouse. It's purple. So here we have the vulva. Right? The pudendum, or the pubes, the area of the body where the sex organs are located. So again, that kind of refers to this lower area. The Mons Pubis is this mound of fatty tissue right above the pelvic bone. And you can feel that if you reach down. It's kind of a cleft where it falls off. That is ideally kind of a place to stop friction from happening. Kind of like an impact bumper. The Labia Majora are the 2 large outer lips from the Mons Pubis. So here we go. Labia Majora. I keep forgetting if you can see my mouse or not. So Labia Majorum here, the outer side. And Labia Majora literally means large lips. So the Labia Minora are the 2 inner folds. So these are the Labia Minora. Erase that now. The clitoris is a small pea-shaped bump at the front of the labia that contains erectile tissue. And it looks like it ran off here. I don't want to hit next because it won't let me go back. But it is the female analogous to the penis. So it has erectile tissue, and basically when you are developing, and if you're a male under the influence of testosterone, what would be your clitoris gets bigger and becomes a penis. So the clitoris is erectile tissue, and when stimulated it will become erect and hard. And they come in all different sizes. They actually exist inside the body as well as partially outside. And I believe we looked it up one year. I have absolutely no idea if this is true or not, but high school students, they found that the largest one was like 13 inches or something crazy for a clitoris. And that obviously included inside and outside the body. Oh, and the urethra, which is below the clitoris. It's the opening to the bladder. And I've got a little side view coming up here, but we'll talk about that a little bit more. So the hymen is a narrow fold of tissue encircling the entrance to the vagina. It's why the first time you have sex there may be blood. They used to be checked if you were like a princess or something, but they can be broken for all kinds of reasons before the first time you have sex. Like horseback riding was a common reason not to have one. Just genetically, you might not have a very thick one. You can even have a very overdeveloped one. So it's very unique and individual. The actual vagina is the passageway from the outside of the body to the uterus. The cervix is inside, and again, I'll mention this on the side picture, but you've got right below, it's the opening to the uterus from the inside of the vagina. So the uterus is a place where the baby grows in a woman's abdomen. The fallopian tubes are 2 tubular structures leading from the ovaries to the uterus. And again, I got a better picture of that coming up. Probably should have that one instead of this one. One fact that I haven't mentioned yet, and I don't think it's mentioned later on, is that the length of the vagina is actually relatively short at only about 4 inches. After that, you begin hitting into the cervix and the uterus, which can be kind of painful for the woman. And then the ovaries, as internal organs, are again on another picture here. Here we go. So here we've got some ovaries. Oops, that's an eraser. Here we've got ovaries, and they're going to be the storage place for the female's eggs. So this probably comes a little later, but here's the vaginal canal. 4 inches or so out of here, you get back into Labia Minora and all that other stuff in the outside of the body. When a man ejaculates inside of a woman, the semen collect here in these little pockets, and then the sperm swim up, and they swim, I don't remember if you can read this, and at this point you have to make a 50-50 decision if you're a sperm, and pick which fallopian tube to go up. So here's your fallopian tubes, and every month you switch sides. So 1 month you'll ovulate from this ovary, the next month, if everything's normal, you'll ovulate from this ovary. And the egg will come out, and only the sperm that came down this side will have the opportunity to meet that egg. And it's a pretty small window. It's about a 72-hour window, but sperm live for an incredibly long time. They can live up to 7 days, with the average being about 4 days inside. So if in that 4 to 7 day period an egg happens to come down these tubes and there happens to be sperm there, then fertilization will take place, and the egg and sperm combined will implant in the uterus, and you'll become pregnant. You can have what's called a tubal pregnancy, where they'll meet and start developing, and then they attach like here. And that can be really bad, because as the baby grows and grows, you can see there's going to be a problem. Eventually, this isn't going to be able to hold the baby anymore, and it ruptures explosively, and there's a lot of blood, and it can be very life-threatening for the mom. So if you know anyone, or if you're ever in this situation and you get this really sharp abdominal pain, kind of a searing, slicing pain early in the pregnancy, then it's an immediate emergency room trip, and the baby is probably not viable at that point, but you need to save the mother's life. So here's another view straight down the middle. I always mention on this one, if you watched Orange is the New Black, I don't know, the show where they all got confused and they had no idea that apparently there are 2 holes, one for your pee to come out and one for the vagina. So there are 2 separate holes, and that's a piece of information, I guess, that is not commonly known. So I know what I was mentioned on this picture. So here you've got the bladder. So what do pregnant women always want to know when they go out somewhere? If they're kind of farther along in their pregnancy, they want to know where the bathroom is. Because this uterus is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And what is it sitting on top of? Well, none other than your bladder. And until about 6 months, the baby is head up in here, and he's doing nothing but kicking downward, and it's kicking on your bladder. So if you have to pee and the baby's sitting on your bladder and kicking your bladder, you can see for females it's a very short trip out of the bladder. It can be really easy to kind of pee yourself. So pregnant women typically always want to know where the bathroom is, and they are experts at knowing in any place that they go. You may have heard that after sex you should pee. It doesn't prevent STDs, as the myth seems to say. What it would prevent are urinary tract infections. If there's any kind of bacteria or anything and it gets up this relatively short urethra here, that can be the cause for many urinary tract infections for women. So if you pee, you kind of force all that bacteria out of there and clean this tube. Men have a much longer urethra, so we're not as prone to urinary tract infections. Alright, other things. You may hear about a D&C. If something goes wrong with the pregnancy, it's possible that the baby might not all come out. You have to have what's known as a dilation and curettage, which is a minor operation where they kind of go in there and they puff up the uterus and they kind of clean it up a little bit. They have to do that sometimes because parts of an aborted pregnancy might remain in there and cause all kinds of hormone missignals in a female's body, and if it's just not getting cleared out properly, they go in there and do it manually with a DNC. Endometriosis is a condition where there's pieces of endometrium in abnormal places in the body. So as your body cycles through the typical 28-day cycle where hormones go up and down and all around, this endometrial tissue, which can be found in all kinds of weird places, including like your spinal cord, your abdomen, arms and stuff, joints, it grows and then it bleeds just like your uterus. And this causes a lot of pain and like suffering. One thing I've heard of is that you could possibly get rid of it by when you have your first child, because the length of time that you don't have that hormonal cycle may actually kill off the endometrial tissue that's in the wrong location. I don't know how much science there is to that, but I've heard that rumor, and if it's something that affects you, it might be something to look into. Not that anyone listening to this lecture should be getting pregnant anytime soon. Orgasm. So a massive release of muscle tension, which is built up during the excitement. So we're going to go over in the next lesson the sexual response cycle. And I kind of miss having you guys live here because there's always a lot of really good questions that I don't mind answering. Dysmenorrhea is just painful menstruation. Menstruation is your period. So sometimes it can be quite painful. And if they are chronically that way, then you would have dysmenorrhea. It's like the word dysfunction and menorrhea, so dysmenorrhea means painful periods. Hysterectomy, many of you might have parents who have had this done, so surgical removal of the uterus and sometimes the ovaries too. That's usually the difference between what's called a partial or a complete hysterectomy. And tubal ligation, so your parents might have had their tubes tied, or you might have heard that before. That's when they go in there and they basically just cut off the path and they block it so that the egg can't go down and the sperm can't go up and meet the egg in the tube because the tubes are no longer connected. Not 100%, it's like 99 point something percent because sperm will find a way. PMS, just a common colloquialism for premenstrual syndrome. That time of the month, typically there's a huge shift in hormones and women may be more difficult to get along with during that time. But it's definitely not in all women. The menstrual cycle, probably should have talked about this earlier. The process of passing blood and tissue, lining of the uterus from the body. It's often called a weeping uterus because the uterus didn't get a baby. Poor uterus. So it tears down the drapes and throws them away. The drapes being the lining and all the blood and everything else. Toxic shock syndrome. Bacteria that live in the vagina, there are a lot of them. It's its own unique biome. Remember we talked about biomes in the last lecture for the digestive system? Well, the vagina has a biome of its own. Just like your skin has its own biome, your mouth has its own biome. And they're all different, unique little ecosystems. So when everything's right and balanced, the vagina has this certain bacterial colony that live in it, like a desert or a rainforest or Canada. I don't know. Canada's a weird one. I don't know where that came from. Anyway, if you, typically it's associated with tampon usage, if you leave it in there a super long time, then the bacteria can multiply and cause a horrible infection that you don't want. Menopause, it's when the remaining eggs no longer are called to develop. That's typically around 45 to 55 years old. And you also get to stop having periods at that point. Estrogen is the name of the primary female sex hormone. It's the egg-producing hormone. Easy to remember, they both start with E, estrogen, egg-producing. Progesterone is the hormone that stimulates the buildup of the lining of the uterus. It's known as the egg-setting hormone because it's getting ready for the egg. And there's all kinds of charts that go with this stuff. It's super complex. I'd have probably spent a little more time going back and forth with you guys with this, but here we are. Ovulation, the time when the egg is released from the ovary. So that typically happens in the middle of your cycle. Often it is day 14. Not always, because that if you always planned on avoiding a certain day, that would be called the rhythm method. And that's not a very effective method. I believe it's 80% effective. So that means that in 100 times of sex, 20 of them you would have gotten pregnant. So that's not a very good set of odds if you're trying to avoid pregnancy. So the calendar method, not a particularly reliable method. But ovulation is when the egg's released. That's typically around day 14. So if you were trying to time things, sperm can survive up to 7 days. The egg can be released around day 14, so it's plus or minus 3 days. So that means that if you were trying to do just calendar method, you would avoid basically from day 8 until day 19 or so, 18 or 19. That would be the most likely time to get pregnant. But again, very unreliable. All right, fertilization. So here we go. We got a cool thing here, a little video. So you can see the egg coming out of the ovary. The sperm swims up there and meets them. But you got to know that you are a winner. At one point, you were a sperm, half your genetic information. You were 1 in approximately 100 million. You won that race. That's pretty cool, right? Right? 1 in 100 million? That's awesome. All right, so 2 more hormones. Follicle-stimulating hormone. This is the hormone that brings a few of the eggs that are sitting in the woman's body. And I got this fun fact down here, but you can't see it because of my face. I turn off. No, I can't do that while I'm recording. Women are born with about 2 million eggs, and they lose about 10,000 every month prior to puberty. So that's really cool. Every single egg that you will ever have, you were born with if you're a girl. So that means my daughter has the egg that will eventually become her child in her already, and she's 2. Isn't that cool? Now you're losing them, about 10,000 per month up to that point, for all kinds of reasons, and this is why it's more dangerous to get pregnant later on in your life, because as you've gone through your life, think about it, before you even start ovulating, you've had, 13-ish years of damage to your body, which means X-rays, background radiation, just purely physical trauma, horrible diet, whatever your personal poison is. And that can damage the eggs and make them more likely to have errors in their genetic information. So if you wait to have a baby until you're like 42, right, those eggs have been through a lot of background radiation, and it's possible that there's more genetic damage there, and that's why there's increased risk. You're a high-risk pregnancy if you have a later pregnancy. Luteinizing hormone is what causes the follicle to burst, so it pops like a pimple. See the little red spot here, and allows the ovum to fall into the opening of the tube. And these little things on the end here are called fimbriae, which is probably Latin for fingers, and they kind of have this gentle sweeping motion. It's kind of cool. You can see a video of it, and they sweep the egg into the tube. So we talked about tubal pregnancies a little bit, but you can also have another kind of ectopic pregnancy where it's intestinal. So if the egg is outside here and doesn't get swept in the tube, and a sperm happens to swim up here and be swimming around inside your organs, then it could get fertilized and implant outside of the uterus and outside of the fallopian tubes. Depending on where it attaches, it might or might not make it. Most of the time it's probably not, but usually they would just deliver it super early, because obviously out here where we've got our digestive organs and stuff is not made for supporting the life of a child. So we can save those sometimes. And I always thought that was personally kind of gross that, if a man ejaculates in you, the sperm are swimming up and then swimming through, and technically they're also swimming within your abdomen, where they'll eventually die and they'll just get absorbed by your body and used for parts. Each amount of ejaculate is approximately 5 to 10 calories worth of energy. Ova is when you're referring to multiple eggs. Ovum is the singular, and it is the female reproductive cell, much like the sperm or the man. Uh-oh, I'm clicking next. Oh boy. Here we go. Watch it go. Oh no. Alright. Males, finally. They're a whole lot easier. There's not a lot to them. So testosterone, the male reproductive hormone made by the testicles and causes changes of puberty. The penis, which is basically just an organ to put sperm inside of a female. The scrotum, which has the unique feature in that it can become like lax or more taut because the development of sperm is very dependent on temperature. So if it's really hot out, or if you're really warm, they'll tend to sag down lower because they need to get cooler. And if it's really cold, they'll pull up into the body and try to get warmth from the body to maintain that proper temperature. The testicles, the testes refer to the glands, which are the testicles, and the hormones that produce testosterone. So here's a side view of the male. So sperm are the male sex cell, and they go and fertilize the female's ovum. Each one has 23 chromosomes, if you want to go back to bio. The prostate gland is right here, and it's what helps make the semen. So some people think that semen and sperm are the same thing. Sperm is an ingredient of semen. Semen is actually a bunch of other stuff, including sperm, things that are like nutritional fluid, kind of like food to go along the way, and make the vagina a little bit less hostile of an environment. So it's the body's way of sending some materials along to keep the sperm alive for longer. COWPER'S glands, they make some of the ingredients that help neutralize the acid in the harsh female environment. The ejaculatory duct is a straight tube that passes and kind of comes together with the urethra and the bladder here. Opens into the urethra. So here's another side view. The urethra is the tube that goes from the bladder down and out. So remember we talked about urinary tract infections? Well, this would be much harder for bacteria to get up and cause an infection of the bladder. So men typically have less chance of getting a urinary tract infection. Although, as a little side note, if you get a kidney stone up here, which some of you might be lucky to get, when it breaks down and comes through this tube, it's got to go a long way out. And some of them are sharp like razor blades. I've been lucky not to have that, but I know people who suffer from them, and they are terrible. The epididymis, a structure that forms a mass over the back and upper part of each testes. So that's this little guy here, the epididymis. The vas deferens refers to the two tubes leading from the epididymis to the seminal vesicles, where the sperm are going to be stored until they're ejaculated. And I believe it's about 6 months that the sperm are good for, and then they get kind of recycled. So other concerns for men: circumcision is the process of removing a flap of skin that covers the glands of the penis. So that's the top, the head portion. If you've been circumcised, some kids pulled up the video one time, and it's a surgical procedure. They have this clamp that kind of secures everything, and they can slice it without hurting anything else. It's very weird to see. It's done by just preference nowadays. I feel like the general consensus has been moving towards more non-circumcision, to just leave things intact. So there is one potential benefit of being circumcised that I know of, but there's also a detriment. So if you're circumcised, you're slightly less likely to contract HIV, because the fluids that would transmit the HIV don't hold in there because of the skin. But it's also been shown that your ability to feel pleasure will be lessened compared to somebody who has not been circumcised, because the head of your penis, if you're circumcised, is constantly being touched and stimulated in different ways, just throughout everyday life. So you don't get as high of a high, I guess you could say. Ejaculation, so about 200 million sperm per every ejaculation, and that's a little high of a number, but it's not. It depends on the person. That's why you'll see some different numbers. Semen is the name of the thick, sticky fluid. Nocturnal emissions would be like wet dreams kind of stuff. So normal involuntary ejaculation while you're asleep, completely normal. Impotence is the failure to get and maintain an erection. Generally not a problem in younger people. This is typically once you've gotten a little older, or it could just be psychological. If you're worried about performance, then you're not letting the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system do what they need to do to go through that sexual response cycle. So if you're worried and you're not letting the systems do what they're going to do, you're not going to be able to get an erection, and it's going to go away. and then the next time you're going to be worried about being worried, and it's kind of a cycle, and it can be interesting to try to break. But that's one particular reason. There can be also nutritional, diet, metabolic reasons like diabetes can cause impotence. Vasectomy is a surgical procedure where they clip the vas deferens. There's also, they can squirt some kind of weird, it's not concrete or foam, but it's like that, where they put it in the tube and it just kind of blocks it. Right, that might be it for other related concerns for men. We're nearly done here. Doing pretty good. All right, swimming for your life. Like I said, you guys are all winners. You were 1 in 100 million at some point. So it's a tiny package with a big responsibility. It has to fertilize the egg. So daily sperm production by a healthy man is 10 to 50 million. This one says about 100 million in the average ejaculation. About 100 million, or about half of them are working, half of them are broken. They'll end up swimming in circles. Obviously, you weren't that one. You got there. Now, the one joke I always make is that if you go and study this a little bit, you'll learn that the ovum has this really cool like shield, the egg. And what happens is it only lets one sperm in at a time. So really what probably happened is some other guy made it there first, and he was digging and digging and digging, and he got a little tired, and then you, Mr. or Mrs. 1 in 100 million, swept in and just kind of dug the last couple shovelfuls and broke in. So congratulations on your sweeping victory. The average swimming speed of a sperm, 8 inches per hour. That is pretty impressive. Survival time in a woman is 2 to 7 days. And, oh yeah, we got to talk about sexual development a touch. So, males, erections begin pretty much as soon as you're out. And little boys like kind of love to sit there and play with themselves, and it's completely normal. They're just kind of spontaneous at that point. It's not because they got aroused or anything. It's just the body practicing. Ages 11 to 14, secondary sexual characteristics. So, you get the hair in places. Voices change, 13 to 16. Alright, I'm back, and hopefully not all that's gone. A pipe exploded. Hey, it's okay. Alright, so ages 13 to 16, sperm is produced in adult amounts. And late teens is the peak sexual urge for boys, so that's when they want to have sex at the absolute most. And then throughout life, as long as there's good health, there's always going to be a sexual urge and the ability to father children. Females, ages 9 to 12, they get their secondary sexual characteristics. You see a little bit ahead of boys. Ages 11 to 14, the menstrual cycle typically begins. Late 20s to 30 is their peak sexual urges. And then ages 45 to 55, menopause. So the cycle stops, but sexual urges continue. And that